let's just begin. Okay, this is session number 78. It's the beginning of chapter 11, and chapter 11 is entitled God or the Ego. Okay. And what we're going to do in this session is the introduction on page 193 and section number 1 on page 194 entitled The Gifts of Fatherhood. Okay. So we're going to revisit along the line here the authority problem. So, either God or the ego is insane. If you will examine the evidence on both sides fairly, you will realize this must be true. Neither God nor the ego proposes a partial thought system. Each is internally consistent, but they are diametrically opposed in all respects, so that partial allegiance is impossible. Remember, too, that their results are as different as their foundations, and their fundamentally irreconcilable natures cannot be reconciled by vacillations between them. Nothing alive is fatherless, for life is creation. Therefore, your decision is always an answer to the question, who is my father? And you will be faithful to the Father you choose. Okay. So, there's no two ways about it. There's no vacillations. Either God or the ego is insane. All right? And you'll see, he says, if you examine it, you'll see. It must be true. And neither God nor the ego proposes a partial thought system. In other words, you can have some heaven in hell, and you can have some hell in heaven. All right? There's no gray area, as it were. All right? It's one or the other. Okay? We experience, gradations, so to speak, because we vacillate, and we don't realize how quickly we vacillate. All right? We can have a moment, a holy instant, all right, where we're in the right mind, all right? And then something happens, and we're quickly right back in the ego thought system. All right? It's mostly fear of becoming abstract. I mean, that's basically it. It's like, what am I going to be? We're so used to being this, okay? You're so used to being yourself, and with your family and your history and, your bright future and all that, that we become afraid of losing that. And that's what the ego would tell you. You're going to lose that. Right? You're going to be all alone. You're just going to be all alone. You're going to be floating around. All right? So we become afraid, and we don't even realize how quickly we become afraid and run back to the ego. All right? It's only when we're in the ego that we can recognize, oh, I ran back to the ego. And then we can choose, do I want to stay there? Or do I want help in getting out and dissolving it? All right? Each is internally consistent. The ego and God, they're consistent thought systems. Okay? And but they're diametrically opposed. Okay? And partial allegiance is impossible. All right? And remember that their results are as different as their foundations. Okay? And their fundamentally irreconcilable natures cannot be reconciled by vacillations. Okay? you just can't bring the two thought systems into agreement. All right? It's just not going to happen because they are so diametrically opposed. The thought system, so to speak, of heaven is the oneness. Okay? It's just there's God and his thought, which is you. Right? And there's nowhere where that is separate. There's no place, as the book says, where God ends and the Father begins. I mean, and the Son begins. Right? Just, try to describe something that's indescribable. But it's only the oneness. And the ego thought system is the thought of separation, individuality. It's constant separation. All right, so they are diametrically opposed. Okay? But he says you're going to give your allegiance to what you think created you. All right? And he says the craziness about the ego thought system is that the one Son of God who had the idea, oh, maybe I could be separate, right? And instead of laughing at that idea, took it seriously as if it were achievable, okay? Then automatically the mind split. There was guilt, right? And the Son was counseled by the ego, all right, leave the mind. We have to get away because it projected anger onto God, right? Which was the original anger of not being recognized as an individual. Okay. And then we land in the universe as innocent victims, thinking that I didn't create this. I was created. I was put here by some force. All right? So I think that the ego thought system, so to speak, is my Father, although I created it, all right, as the one Son of God. All right? He says it's insane, but you believe it, and he says, and you will have allegiance to your Father. Right? So if you think the ego thought system created you, and you were created in this world and all that, then you'll have allegiance to that, okay? And he says everything has a cause. Everything has a cause, right? Therefore, your decision is always an answer to the question, who is my Father? And you will be faithful to the Father you chose, ego or God. Okay, paragraph 2. Yet, what would you say to someone who believed the question really involves conflict? If you made the ego, how can the ego have made you? The authority problem is still the only source of conflict, because the ego is made out of the wish of God's Son to father him. Okay? The authority problem is still the only source of conflict, because the ego is made out of the wish of God's Son to father him. The ego, then, is nothing more than a delusional system in which you made your own father. Make no mistake about this. It sounds insane when it is stated with perfect honesty, but the ego never looks on what it does with perfect honesty. Yet that is its insane premise, which is carefully hidden in the dark cornerstone of its thought system. And either the ego which you made is your father, or its whole thought system will not stand. Okay? That's why the ego doesn't want us to look. It doesn't want us to really look at the foundation of the thought system. Okay? Realizing that it was an idea that popped up, the tiny mad idea that popped up in the Son, in the mind of the Son. All right. And than thinking it could be accomplished, boom, here we have it, the proverbial Big Bang, right? And everything is proving to us that we're here, unless you really start to look at everything, right? And either the ego which you made is your father, or its whole thought system will not stand, or else the whole thing just crumbles, right? So either you are the innocent victim, right, or the whole thought system fails, right? Because if you had something to do with the creation or miscreation of the ego thought system and its form, then you can have something to do with its undoing. You can make another choice. You can choose to put your allegiance with another father, with your true father. Okay? So paragraph 3, you make by projection, but God creates by extension. Right? The cornerstone of God's creation is you. For his thought system is light. Remember the rays that are there unseen. The more you approach the center of his thought system, the clearer the light becomes. The closer you come to the foundation of the ego's thought system, the darker and more obscure becomes the way. Yet even the little spark in your mind is enough to lighten it. Bring this light fearlessly with you and bravely hold it up to the foundation of the ego's thought system. Be willing to judge it with perfect honesty. Open the dark cornerstone of terror on which it rests. Bring it out into the light. There you will see that it rested on meaninglessness, and that everything of which you have been afraid was based on nothing. My brother, you are part of God and part of me. When you have at last looked at the ego's foundation without shrinking, you will also have looked upon ours. I come to you from our Father to offer you everything again. Do not refuse it in order to keep the dark cornerstone hidden, for its protection will not save you. I give you the lamp, and I go with you. You will not take this journey alone. I will lead you to your true Father, who hath need of you as I have. Will you not answer the call of love with joy? Okay, that's the introduction, but let's just go over a point or two here. He says, you make by projection. Once again, telling us how we miscreated this world by taking the guilt, all right, the sin, the thought of separation, and the guilt that comes with it, and the fear of retaliation. All right, so that thought of separation, we project it out. All right, we think we're running away from now an angry God that we miscreated also. Okay, so we project out into the world, and we make up the world. Time and space and form are all projected from the one mind in order to get rid of guilt, and it doesn't work, okay? So the foundation of the ego's thought system is that belief that I can be separated from my creator. I can be separated from my source. That's the foundation, all right? And he says, but he's telling us, first of all, you're part of the great rays, okay? The cornerstone of God's creation is you. You are the cornerstone. That's what God created. God extended himself, and there you are, as part of him, okay? The more you approach the center of God's thought system, the clearer the light becomes, okay? So the closer you come to the foundation of the ego's thought system, the darker and more obscure becomes the way. Yet even the little spark in your mind is enough to lighten it. Right? So as we approach and we're questioning the ego's thought system, he says, don't worry about it. That little spark of who you really are, the great rays, right? That little spark of light is enough to lighten up the ego so we can see it as it truly is, and then just dismiss it as meaningless and silly. Okay? So bring this light fearlessly with you as you look at the ego. Bring the light with you. And that's a poetic way of saying, Jesus, help me to see this correctly. Right? As I say, I'm wagering I say that about 9,000 times before we're finished with the text. But to me, that's the way I look at it, okay? I go to Jesus, my friend, okay? My brother. He even says here, he's your brother. All right? And ask him, how do I see this correctly? Because I can't do it by myself. There are no answers within the ego thought system. I have to step out of the ego thought system and ask Jesus, how do I see this whole thing correctly, whatever it is, whether it's specifics or it's the world and situations. How do I see it correctly? Which means, how do I perceive it knowing that I'm connected to love? Okay. Be willing to judge the ego's thought system with perfect honesty. Open the dark cornerstone of terror on which it rests and bring it out into the light. All right? He says, open that cornerstone of terror on which the ego rests. The ego keeps telling you, don't look, don't go there. Don't look at what you did. All right? Just push it down and push it away. Repress it and project it. Don't look at it. Okay? You're going to be destroyed. All right? And it tells us the same thing by going to the right mind. Don't go there. You'll be destroyed also. All right? But he says if you bring the light with you as you examine the ego, you'll see that it rested on meaninglessness, which is the basic foundation, the thought of separation. He says, that's meaningless. He says, that's ridiculous. It can't happen. And it never happened. We're imagining this. All right? And congratulations, you have a wonderful imagination because this stuff seems pretty real, doesn't it? But this is why we need to reach out of the thought system and help us with our perceptions, help us with our interpretations of what we are seeing and experiencing through the senses. Okay? And he says, just bring the light, look at stuff, and he says, you'll see it's meaningless and that everything of which you have been afraid was based on nothing. Right? Everything of which I am afraid is based on nothing. Okay? It's based on the thought of separation. The thought that I'm separated from my source. I'm separated from God. All right? And we practice getting back to that memory of being united with God. Okay. And now he ends the introduction by referring to you as a brother. All right? And that goes for you ladies out there too. Okay? My brother, you are part of God and part of me. All right? No separation. When you have at last looked at the ego's foundation without shrinking, you will also have looked upon ours. So I look on the ego's foundation without being afraid, and the ego's foundation, once again, is the thought of separation. He says, you'll also be looking at our foundation, which is the oneness, the connectedness to God. Okay? And Jesus says, I come to you from our Father to offer you everything again. All right? To help you remember who you are. To help you remember that you are and you have everything. There is no lack. There is nothing to be vulnerable about. All right? There is only fullness, oneness, bliss, joy. Words that limit what the experience is. He says, I've come from the Father to offer you this again. Do not refuse it in order to keep a dark cornerstone hidden. All right? For its protection will not save you. All right? So don't turn your back on what I'm offering you just to keep the thought of separation going. He says, that's not going to protect you. All right? It's going to make you just fearful and depressed and lonely. All right? It's not going to save you. It's not going to protect you. He goes, I give you the lamp, and I go with you. Right? Jesus is our brother, our guide, shining the light on everything that we ask him to shine the light on. Help me to see this correctly. All right? He says, you will not take this journey alone. All right? This is not... one of the trials of Hercules. It's not the Odyssey. All right? You don't have to do this by yourself. So, I give you the lamp and I will go with you. All right? You will not take this journey alone. I will lead you to your true Father, who hath need of you as I have. He goes, and then think about it. Will you not answer the call of love with joy? Love is calling to you. All right? Imagine yourself as a little child, fearful. All right? At some point in your life, whether it was a child or growing up or as an adult, there was some time in your life when you felt alone, terrified, lost. You were lost. Okay? Then try to recall that sense of relief when you were found or you found who you needed. I always picture myself and others as little children being lost in a department store or in a mall. All right? A little kid is terrified, screaming, maybe running around looking. Then all of a sudden, mommy appears, or daddy appears. And there's the love that they're familiar with. There's the security, all right, that they're familiar with. All right? What a sense of joy comes over them. Oh, I'm so happy my mother is here again. My father is here again. Okay? He says, will you not answer the call of love with joy? Okay? Now we're going to begin section 1. It's called The Gifts of Fatherhood. Okay? So, he says, you have learned your need of healing. Would you bring anything else to the sonship, recognizing your need of healing for yourself? For in this lies the beginning of the return to knowledge, the foundation on which God will help build again the thought system you share with him. Not one stone you place upon it will be but blessed by him. For you will be restoring the holy dwelling place of his Son, where he wills his Son to be and where he is. In whatever part of the mind of God's Son you restore this reality, you restore it to yourself. You dwell in the mind of God with your brother, for God himself did not will to be alone. And obviously we're not alone on the street here either. All right. It's the noisy street outside. And we had to change our venue in the apartment because of all kinds of things going on in the world outside. Okay then, so let's get back to this. He says, you have learned of your need of healing. You've learned that the mind is split and there's a choice to be made. Okay? And he says, would you bring anything else to the sonship, recognizing your need for healing for yourself? He says, so you bring that healing for yourself and to the sonship. Right? For in this lies the beginning of the return to knowledge. When the mind is healed, there's the return to knowledge. Okay? I hope that siren is not too distracting and that it will end eventually. Okay? So, all right, for in this, the healing of the mind, the healing of the split mind, is the return to knowledge. Okay? So, paragraph 2, to be alone is to be separated from infinity. But how can this be if infinity has no end? No one can be beyond the limitless, because what has no limits must be everywhere. There are no beginnings and no endings in God, whose universe is himself. Can you exclude yourself from the universe or from God, who is the universe? I and my Father are one with you, for you are part of us. Do you really believe that part of God can be missing or lost to him? Okay. All right, he says you can't be separated from infinity. Right? To be alone is to be separated from infinity. He says, how can this be if infinity has no end? There's no place where you could be separated. Okay? He says, I and the Father are one with you, for you are part of us. Do you really believe that part of God can be missing or lost to him? So he's reiterating the atonement principle. You can't leave the mind of God. Okay? You just can't do it. Alrighty then. It's done. So, that's the atonement principle being restated again. You cannot leave the mind of God. You cannot leave the oneness. It's oneness. It's infinity. There's no separation involved in infinity. It has no endings, no beginnings. Right? There's no edge that you can jump over and get away. All right? And why would you want to get away once you know what it's all about? You know? Alrighty then. If you were not part of God, in paragraph 3, if you were not part of God, his will would not be unified. Is this conceivable? Can part of his mind contain nothing? If your place in his mind cannot be filled by anyone except you, and your filling it was your creation, without you, there would be an empty place in God's mind. Extension cannot be blocked, and it has no voids. It continues forever, however much it is denied. Your denial of its reality may arrest it in time, but not in eternity. This is why your creations have not ceased to be extended, and why so much is waiting for your return. Okay? This is as if, right? As if you could leave the mind of God. All right? He says, if your place in the mind of God cannot be filled except by anyone except you, he says, you're filling that place in God's mind. That was your creation. All right? Do you think there's an empty place now in God's mind because you left? All right? It's a silly idea once you get to it. All right? He says, so do you think that is a little void, a little vacuum in God's mind? Because you snuck out the back door? All right? He says, extension can't be blocked. He says, that's what God does. That's what you do. That's your true function, is extension, the way God extends. Extending, as Jesus just said, everything. I bring you everything again. Okay? So, extension cannot be blocked, and it has no voids. There's no little empty spots. It continues forever, however much it is denied. It says you could deny it all you want, but it continues. All right? All right. Your denial of its reality may arrest it in time. So time is a miscreation of the ego thought system also. Okay? So within time and space where we exist, he goes, you might arrest your extensions, that part of you, all right? You may arrest it, but not in eternity. In eternity, you keep on functioning, all right? This is, like he says, you are at home, functioning, dreaming of exile. There's some silly thought floating around that says you could be separate. Okay? This is, he says, so you could arrest it in time, but not in eternity. All right? This is why your creations have not ceased to be extended. Your creations are continuing to extend. Your thoughts of the fullness of eternity, the fullness of God. He says, and that's why so much is waiting for you when you return. All right? Like that relief that the little child feels when he sees his mother or father after being lost for what seemed like an interminable amount of time. Okay? So much is waiting for your return. And then he goes in paragraph 4, waiting is possible only in time. All right? But time has no meaning. All right? Just a little phrase in there. You could think about that for a long time. All right? Waiting is possible only in time, and time has no meaning. You who made delay can leave time behind simply by recognizing that neither beginnings nor endings were created by the Eternal, who placed no limits on his creation, or upon those who create like him. You do not know this simply because you have tried to limit what he created, and so you believe that all creation is limited. How then could you know your creations, having denied infinity? So we deny who we really are. Okay? We deny that we're infinite spirit. All right? He says the Eternal placed no limits on you. All right? God didn't place any limits on you. You are infinite and eternal. All right? He says, you made delay possible by creating time. Right? And he says, you've limited who you really are. You've limited to this body, and this world, this country, this whatever. The solar system even is limiting. Okay? It's all very limited. And he says, you don't know the boundlessness of yourself and eternity. He says, you don't know this simply because you have tried to limit what God created. And so you believe that all creation is limited. All right? He says, how then could you know your creations, having denied infinity? All right? So in other words, how could you know heaven? How could you know of your connection to God, having denied it already? Paragraph 5. The laws of the universe do not permit contradiction. What holds for God holds for you. If you believe you are absent from God, you will believe that he is absent from you. Infinity is meaningless without you, and you are meaningless without God. There is no end to God and his Son, for we are the universe. God is not incomplete, and his Son is not childless. Because he did not will to be alone, he created a Son like himself. Do not deny him his Son, for your unwillingness to accept his fatherhood has denied you yours. See his creations as his Son, for yours were created in honor of him. The universe of love does not stop because you do not see it, nor have your closed eyes lost the ability to see it. All right? The universe of love does not stop because you do not see it, nor have your closed eyes lost the ability to see. Look upon the glory of his creation, and you will learn what God has kept for you. Right? So he says, there is no end to God and his Son, you. You are the universe. Okay? All right? And God is not complete. He's not incomplete and he's not childless. He did not want to be alone, so he created you. It's all very poetic metaphor, okay? Because he did not will to be alone, he created a Son like himself. All right? You are like God. You create the same way. All right? You extend your being. Okay? So, do not deny him his Son. Okay? Do not deny him. Do not deny that you were created as the Son. All right? Otherwise you wind up in the ego thought system, thinking that the ego thought system created you. You were created somehow with a sperm and an egg and all that. Okay? It's a very convincing story, but it turns out to be false. Alrighty then. So, do not deny him his Son, for your unwillingness to accept his fatherhood has denied you yours. All right? So we're unwilling to accept God as our Father. All right? And by that unwillingness, we've denied our own fatherhood, which is the creation. We create as God does. we become progenitors, so to speak. All right? You become the creators also. All right? So, he says, the universe of love does not stop because you do not see it. Right? Nor have your closed eyes lost the ability to see. All right? Just because you've closed your eyes to who you truly are, all right, doesn't mean you've lost the ability to see. All right? When you wake up, you will see. Okay? So look upon the glory of his creation, and you will learn what God has kept for you. Okay, paragraph 6. God has given you a place in his mind that is yours forever. Yet you can keep it only by giving it as it was given you. Could you be alone there when it was given you because God did not will to be alone? God's mind cannot be lessened. It can only be increased, for everything he creates has the function of creating. Love does not limit, and what it creates is not limited. To give without limit is God's will for you, because only this can bring you the joy that is his, and that he wills to share with you. Your love is as boundless as his, because it is his. You see that it is continually talking about no separation. All right? And God's mind can't be lessened. You can't leave. There's no void. All right? And you can't be alone, because you were created because God didn't will to be alone. And you create as he does. Right? So there is no loneliness. Right? There's only extension of everything. Right? So, to give without limit is God's will for you. All right? That's our function. We give without limit. All right? In reality, we extend the way God does. Okay? These are the gifts that God gives us. Right? That ability to be like him. Right? Not just the ability, the fact that you are like him. Right? So to give without limit is God's will for you, because only this can bring you the joy that is his, and that he wills to share with you. So in the extension of everything comes the joy. Okay? Your love is as boundless as his, because it is his. All right? It's the same. It channels through you. All right? So, paragraph 7. Could any part of God be without his love? And could any part of his love be contained? God is your heritage, because his one gift is himself. Right? This is the main gift of fatherhood. God has given himself to you. You are like him. Okay? How can you give except like him, if you would know his gift to you? Give then without limit and without end, to learn how much he has given you. Your ability to accept him depends on your willingness to give as he gives. All right? Your fatherhood and your Father are one. God wills to create, and your will is his. It follows then that you will to create, since your will follows from his. And being an extension of his will, yours must be the same. Okay? So give then without limit. Right? So you will know the gift. Right? And when we hear in form, in time, the reflection of that function in heaven is forgiveness, which is I take back my projection of guilt onto the other. What a terrible person they are, right? Or however you want to criticize them. I take it back because I realize it gets me nowhere, right? It's not pleasant, right? After a while it becomes very unpleasant, believe me. And we take it back and we ask Jesus, our friend, right? Help me to see this correctly. Help me to reinterpret what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, what I'm sensing, okay? Jesus says, I give you the lamp and I go with you. So this is our function here in time and space, right? Is to allow that extension to give freely, right? What I'm giving is the memory of innocence, the memory of the connection of God. Right? I'm allowing it to come through me by asking, help me to see this correctly. I've connected with the memory of who I am, with Jesus. Right? And I allow it to come through me to correct my perceptions. All right? And when my perception is corrected, it's corrected all throughout the sonship, in every mind. That's the giving, right? That's the unlimited gift that we give when we open up to it, all right? So it follows then that you will to create, since your will follows from his. And being extension of his will, yours must be the same. So let it flow. Yet, what you will, pardon me, getting tongue-tied here, paragraph 8. Yet what you will, you do not know. This is not strange when you realize that to deny is to not know. God's will is that you are his son. By denying this, you deny your own will, and therefore do not know what it is. You must ask what God's will is in everything, because it is yours. You do not know what it is, but the Holy Spirit remembers it for you. Ask him, therefore, what God's will is for you, and he will tell you yours. It cannot be too often repeated that you do not know. Whenever what the Holy Spirit tells you appears to be coercive, it is only because you have not recognized your will. Right? So when we think that we're being asked to do something we don't want to do, right? He says it's only because you recognize it's not your will. It is your will. It's your will that everyone be happy. It's your will that happiness extend throughout the universe. Right? So when we're reluctant to ask Jesus, help me to see this person correctly, all right? We think he's going to ask me to do something I don't want to do. I'm going to become a doormat. Right? They're going to wipe their feet on me. I'm going to get pushed around. I'm going to lose. Whatever. So you become reluctant. You think that they're telling you something that you don't want to really do. You're going to lose. It's only because you don't know your will. Right? You don't know that your will is the same as God's. Right? You are denying who you really are. You deny it, and therefore you don't know. You do not know your will and God's are the same. Okay. So he says you must ask what God's will is in everything. Excuse me, because it is yours. like I've been saying over and over again. All right? Help me to see this correctly. It's another way of saying, what is God's will for me in this situation? All right? What is God's will for me in this situation? Okay? How do I see this correctly? Because corrected perception is the road back to God's will, to knowing God's will. Okay? You do not know what it is, but the Holy Spirit remembers it for you. Remember, the Holy Spirit is in our mind. And we say Jesus is the embodiment of the Holy Spirit. All right? That's why we can, interchange them. All right? So Jesus is the embodiment of the memory of who you are. The Holy Spirit remembers God's will for you. Right? So does Jesus, therefore. All right? So ask him. Ask him, what is God's will for me? In everything, he says, everything. All right? So, every situation, and the big ones are obvious. And after a while, with enough practicing and willingness to see God's will for you, it becomes easier and quicker. Okay? You don't spend years of resentment. All right? As a matter of fact, he might talk about time somewhere right in here, about saving thousands of years. Okay, think about that. Okay? So ask him, therefore, what God's will is for you, and he will tell you yours. It's the same. It cannot be too often repeated that you do not know. Right? So you don't know, so ask before you do anything. All right? I remember somebody saying, you're not paid to think. Well, in other words, Jesus is saying, ask me first. Okay? Ask me. Whenever what the Holy Spirit tells you appears to be coercive, it's only because you have not recognized your will. I think this is one spot where Jesus, once again, talking directly to Helen Schuckman, who complained, once again, that, she knew it was Jesus talking to her when it was something she didn't want to do. Right? He's going to ask me to do something I don't want to do. Right? So he says, whenever that happens, it's only because you have not recognized your will. You've not recognized your connection to God. Okay? Your projection, paragraph 9, your projection of the ego makes it appear as if God's will is outside yourself, and therefore not yours. In this interpretation, it seems possible for God's will and yours to conflict. God, then, may seem to demand of you what you do not want to give, and thus deprive you of what you want. Would God, who wants only your will, be capable of this? Your will is his life, which he has given to you. Even in time, you cannot live apart from him. Sleep is not death. What he created can sleep, but cannot die. Immortality is his will for his Son, and his Son's will for himself. God's Son cannot will death for himself, because his Father is life, and his Son is like him. Creation is your will, because it is his. I keep constantly repeating that your will and God's will are the same. Excuse me. Your will and God's will are the same. All right? And God created you. And he says what he created, all right, so you could fall asleep, but you can't die. All right? You can fall asleep, but you can't die. You're going to wake up. You will wake up. Immortality is his will for his son. Okay? And because we've projected into this ego thought system, we think there's a conflict, once again, the authority problem, with God. God's will and mine are different. No, I know I want this, I need this. This is what I want. All right? Some children used to be described as willful. He's a very willful child. Well, that's because his will and God's will are in conflict. Right? He thinks it's different. He thinks he's being deprived of something. Right? But he keeps on driving that point home that your will and God's will are the same. Right? You are the same as God. Right? Creation is your will because it is his. So the extension of everything is your will because that's God's will. Okay? These paragraphs are chock full with things that you could just sit and think about and realize the entire message of the Course. All right? But that's why they get repeated so often. It's a technique that Jesus described to Helen as overlearning, all right? Which simply means, it's a basic way of teaching, by repetition, all right? That's how we memorize those multiplication tables. Paragraph 10, you cannot be happy unless you do what you will truly. And you cannot change this because it is immutable. It is immutable by God's will and yours, for otherwise his will would not be extended. You are afraid to know God's will because you believe it is not yours. This belief is your whole sickness and your whole fear. Every symptom of sickness and fear arises here. And because this is the belief that makes you want not to know. Believing this, you hide in darkness, denying the light that is in you. All right, it says you can't be happy unless you do what you will truly. You can't be happy unless you're extending everything to everyone, okay? Which is your function in heaven, all right? So you can't be happy unless you're doing that, all right? And he says that doesn't change, all right? It can't change, all right? Otherwise his will would not be extended, right? Then he tells us point blank, you're afraid to know God's will because you believe it's not yours. You believe that your will and God's will conflict. All right? It's going to make me do something I don't want to do. All right? He says, and that makes you afraid to know what God's will is because you believe, you think it's not yours. And he says, and this belief is your whole sickness. You believe that you are separated, you're different than God. All right? This belief is your whole sickness and your whole fear. All right? Because believing you're not part of God, that brings on the fear. All right? There's something out there that's going to get you now. All right? This belief is your whole sickness and your whole fear. Every symptom of sickness and fear arises here. Right? This belief that I am different than God. I'm separate from God. Right? Every symptom arises here because this is the belief that makes you want not to know. Right? So I believe that I'm different from God, so I don't want to know. I don't want to know anything that's going to shake my belief. All right? I don't want anything to rock my world. Right? So he says, this is what makes you want not to know. Believing this, you hide in darkness. All right? You hide in the ego thought system. We hide in the thought of separation. This is believing. All right? You hide in the thought of separation, denying that the light is in you. All right? Oh, that's not me. All right? You deny that the light is in you, and that you can bring it to light up the world. Right? Reminds me of the Grateful Dead song. It says, wake up to find out that you are the light of the world. All right. Wake up. All right. You are the light of the world. Stop denying it. All right. It says you are asked to trust the Holy Spirit only because he speaks for you. He is the voice for God, but never forget that God did not will to be alone. He shares his will with you. He does not thrust it upon you. Always remember that what he gives, he keeps, so that nothing he gives can contradict him. You who share his life must share it to know it, for sharing is knowing. Blessed are you who learn that to hear the will of your Father is to know your own. For it is your will to be like him. Whose will it is that it be so. God's will is that his Son be one, and united with him in his oneness. That is why healing is the beginning of the recognition that your will is his. Okay? So he started off by saying, you have learned your need of healing. Right? Because in that healing is the return to knowledge. And he ends the section by saying that is why healing is the beginning of the recognition that your will is his. Recognizing that your will is his is knowledge. Right? And what we are doing, which seems to be a process, okay? And even Jesus will allow us to admit it's a process. Right? We are healing. Little by little we are healing our thought system, the ego thought system. We're undoing it. We're healing the mind. That mind that has been split, all right, by asking, help me to see this. What is God's will for me in this? Okay? I want the knowledge of God's will. How can I see this correctly? Okay? All those things. All right? I'm willing to see the other person happy. All right? I'm willing to be happy. Help me. Because that's God's will for you. It's happiness. All right? So it all comes together. The words, don't let the words lead you off in different directions. There's many ways to describe. Okay? Right? It's like they say that the truth is one. The sages know it by many names. Okay? So there's many ways to arrive at the truth. This, the Course in Miracles, is one way. All right? Jesus says in the beginning, it's 1,000 ways home. This is one way. All right? And the way home that the Course proposes is to ask. All right? Ask the Holy Spirit who is in your mind. The memory of who you really are is in your mind. Jesus is in your mind. Right? It's not like there's a crowd there. It's all the same thing. All right? The memory of who you are is there. All right? Go to it and ask, what is God's will for me? As far as this person's concerned, what is God's will for me in this situation? All right? how can I see this correctly? The same thing, working our way to 9,000 times. Alrighty then, so we're done. Alrighty then. Very good. We've begun chapter 11. All right, we're forging our way through. All right, so everyone be safe, be healthy, be happy. All right, in all situations. Ask Jesus, how can I be happy? What is God's will for me? All right then. We'll stop now. Okay, bye.